definitive book of body language.
Written and read by
Allan
and Barbara Pease.
Have you ever been in a conversation with someone and got the distinct impression you were being fed a line, or that the person you were talking with was being a little economic with the truth, yet they seem to be saying all the right things? How can you account for your hunches and gut feeling? Is it instinct or intuition? Have you ever wished that you could read people's minds, particularly when you're in an important business meeting? Wouldn't mind reading be useful in a job interview or when trying to close an important deal? When you finish listening to this program, you should be equipped to do just that, and you'll also be able to account for your gut reactions to people who try to get away with telling porkies right in your face. It's all to do with nonverbal communication, what's become known as body language. In over 30 years of research, we've read all there is to read on the subject, conducted hundreds of experiments, published books incorporating all the most recent findings. In fact, you could say that we're professional people watchers. We've used this research to run courses to train people in communication skills, particularly in selling and negotiation techniques. But body language is not just about the business arena. By learning to recognise the silent language of the body, the cues and nonverbal signals that we all use, you'll revolutionise your communication skills and get a greater insight into how you and your fellow human beings operate face to face. Body language isn't new. Charles Darwin published research on it in the 1870s. But it's only recently that its importance has been fully recognised. The first detailed report on nonverbal communication was published in the 1970s, and subsequent research bears out these first extraordinary results. Amazingly, we humans use around 1 million nonverbal cues and signals. You'd think that our ability to talk would rate very highly in the communication stakes, right? Yet research shows that words take up a small percentage of the overall impact of a message, a mere 7 to 10%. And almost a whopping 60 to 80% of the message is conveyed by non-verbal gestures, movements, signals and expressions. The rest is tone of voice, inflection and other sounds that we make. This shouldn't come as a surprise. There are phrases in the language that have been around forever that refer to this non-verbal channel that's used for negotiating interpersonal attitudes. How about some of these? If looks could kill, or a withering glance, and I'm sure you've all experienced the silent treatment. These all convey very clear messages without a single word being uttered. Barbara and I have written the definitive book of body language using my original book, Body Language, as our base. Not only have we expanded considerably on that original book, we've also introduced research from new scientific disciplines, such as evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, as well as technologies such as magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, which shows what happens in the brain. We concentrate mainly on the movement of the body, expressions and gestures, because these are the things you need to learn to get the most out of every face-to-face encounter. The definitive book of body language will make you more aware of your own nonverbal cues and signals, and will show you how to use them to communicate effectively and how to get the reactions you want. In these sessions, we'll examine each component of body language and gesture in simple terms, and that makes it accessible for you. This should give you greater insight into communication with your fellow humans, so that you can have a deeper understanding of other people and, ultimately, of yourself. The knowledge and skills in body language serve to make every encounter with another person an exciting experience. So let's get down to the business of body language. For the purpose of simplicity, and unless otherwise stated, the use of the word he or him will apply equally to both genders. The ability to work out what is really happening with a person is simple. Now, it's not easy, it's simple. It's about matching what you see and hear in the environment in which it all happens and drawing probable conclusions. One common thing you'll notice is that most people don't know they're doing it. Body language is instinctive, unconscious behaviour, and you can't cover it up. Sure, you can learn to suppress giveaway gestures and expressions that you're conscious of, but there'll always be telltale clues that you can't hide, however hard you try. A trained observer or a perceptive person will quickly pick up the mismatch between the words used and the body language they see.
Learning to listen with your eyes isn't new. In the era of the silent movies, an actor who couldn't convey the script with gestures and expressions alone would have a very short career. It should be quite easy to gauge the storyline and human relationships by simply watching the gestures and body language between the characters. Eye movements, hand gestures, and the way stance and relative body positions are used illustrate how the territory on screen is defended or conceited. And so it is with our lives. It's no secret that you can get a very accurate picture if someone is selling you a line by understanding their body language. Despite what it may be politically correct to believe, when we meet people for the first time, we quickly make judgments about their friendliness, dominance, and potential as a sexual partner, and their eyes are not the first place we look. Most researchers now agree that words are used primarily for conveying information, while body language is used for negotiating interpersonal attitudes and in some cases is used as a substitute for verbal messages. For example, a woman can give a man a look to kill and will convey a very clear message to him without opening her mouth. Body language is an outward reflection of a person's emotional condition. Each gesture or movement can be a valuable expression of the emotion of a person may be feeling at the time. For example, a man who is self-conscious about gaining weight may tug at the folds of the skin under his chin. The person who is feeling fearful or defensive might fold their arms or cross their legs or both, and a man talking with a large-breasted woman may consciously avoid staring at her breasts while, at the same time, unconsciously using groping gestures with his hands.
Something that I'd never do. The key to reading body language is being able to understand a person's emotional condition while listening to what they're saying and noting the circumstances under which they're saying it. This allows you to separate fact from fiction and reality from fantasy. We rely on words to convey information, but we have a non-verbal channel that conveys the attitudes and thoughts that lie behind what's spoken. When we think that someone is lying to us, what we mean is that not only does it not sound right, but their body language and spoken words don't agree. People everywhere are fascinated by the body language of politicians because everyone knows that politicians sometimes pretend to support something that they don't actually believe in or infer that they're someone that they really aren't. Politicians spend much of their time ducking, dodging, avoiding, pretending, lying, hiding their emotions and feelings, using smokescreens and mirrors, and waving to imaginary friends in the crowd. But we know that they will eventually be tripped up by contradictory body language signals, so we love to watch them closely in anticipation of catching them out. You know, there's an old joke. How do you tell if a politician's lying? Simple, his lips are moving. Now, for example, France's President Chirac, USA's President Ronald Reagan, and Australia's Prime Minister Bob Hawke all used their hands to reveal the relative sizes of issues in their mind. Bob Hawke once defended pay increases for politicians by comparing their salaries to corporate executive salaries. When he mentioned executive salaries, however, he held his hands only 30 centimetres apart. His hand distances revealed that he felt politicians were getting a much better deal than he was prepared to admit. And who can forget watching US President Bill Clinton facing the grand jury? His words were denying everything, but his body language was shouting a very different story.
We call people who pick up on this mismatch perceptive or intuitive. Being able to read body language and compare it with someone's words is quite a skill. Research shows that women are more perceptive to body language than men. This is commonly called women's intuition. Women are equipped with more finely tuned sensory skills than men. As childbearers and nest defenders, women needed the ability to sense subtle mood and attitude changes in their children and others. That could signal pain, hunger, injury, aggression, or depression. For the first few years, a mother relies solely on the non-verbal channel to communicate with her child, so shuffling feet, lack of eye contact, and covering the mouth when fibbing is a dead giveaway. That's body language in action. Men, being lunch chasers, were never around the cave long enough to learn to read non-verbal signals or the ways of interpersonal communication. In fact, brain scan tests show that when a man's brain is in a resting state, at least 70% of its electrical activity is shut down. Scans of a woman's brain show a level of 90% activity during the same state, confirming that women are constantly receiving and analysing information from their environment. A woman knows her children's friends, hopes, dreams, romances, secret fears, what they are thinking, how they're feeling, and usually what mischief they are plotting. Men are vaguely aware of some short people also living in the house. Women's intuition is something that has always bewildered men who play around and invariably get caught. Few husbands can lie to their wives and get away with it. Conversely, most women can pull the wool over a man's eyes without his realizing it. If you're about to tell a big lie to a woman, do it by email, not face-to-face, and not on the phone.
The culture in which you were raised plays a significant part, as does the context of the gesture or signal. Some gestures seem to be inbuilt. For example, blind children smile without having copied or learnt how. And across different cultures, the same facial expressions are used to show the same emotions. Some gestures may be genetic. When you cross your arms, do you cross left over right or right over left? Do you even know without trying it? This may well be a genetic gesture that can't be changed. Most of the basic body language gestures are the same the world over. Smiling, nodding in agreement, frowning or scowling are almost universal. The shoulder shrug is a good example of a universal gesture that's used to show that a person doesn't know or doesn't understand what you're saying. It's a multiple gesture that has three main parts. First, exposed palms to show that nothing's been concealed in the hands, hunched shoulders to protect the throat from attack, and raised brow, which is a universal submissive greeting. But just as verbal language differs, so can non-verbal language. A gesture used in New York or London may mean something completely different in Athens or Tokyo, and we'll cover this a little later on.
However, what you see and hear in any situation does not necessarily reflect the real attitudes people may actually have. You need to follow 3 basic rules to get things right. Rule number 1 for people watching is don't interpret gestures in isolation. Always look at gesture clusters for a correct reading. Like any other language, body language consists of words, sentences, and punctuation. Each gesture is like a single word, and a word may have several different meanings. For example, in English, the word dressing has at least 10 meanings, including the act of putting on clothes, a sauce for food, an application for a wound, and grooming for a horse. It's only when you put it with other words to make a sentence that you can fully understand its meaning. In the same way, a combination of non-verbal gestures invariably tells the truth about a person's feeling or attitude. This is known as a gesture cluster. If you compare their verbal and non-verbal sentences, you can make an accurate judgment about the person's attitude towards you. Let's look at a common gesture cluster, the one a listener assumes when he is critically evaluating what you are saying. Imagine your listener is sitting opposite you. His legs are crossed, his left arm is crossed defensively over his body, his right elbow is resting on the crossed arm with his index finger pointing up his cheek, while another finger covers the mouth and the thumb supports the chin, with the head and chin pointing down. This non-verbal sentence says something like, "I don't like what you're saying and I disagree with you." The head position in particular infers hostility, and hand-to-face gestures indicate that negative thoughts are uppermost in the listener's mind, and in the right context, they give a clear indication of out-and-out lying. It could mean doubt, deceit, uncertainty, exaggeration, or apprehension. If you want to improve your reading of these gestures, you have to observe the movement of the hand and what part of the face it touches. Not only that, it's also helpful to keep an eye on the movements that precede the hand-to-face gesture. If you were to ask the listener to give his opinion of what you have just said, and he said that he disagreed with you, his verbal and non-verbal sentences would match or be consistent. If he said the opposite, that he was enjoying what you had to say, he would probably be lying because his words and gestures would be inconsistent. People actually rely far more on non-verbal sentences, so checking out their body language can be absolutely vital if you want the truth.
Rule number 2. Always look for congruence. Research shows that non-verbal signals carry about 5 times as much impact as the verbal channel, and that when the two are incongruent or inconsistent, people, particularly women, rely on the non-verbal channel and disregard the verbal content. So if you, as the speaker, were to ask the listener we've just described to give his opinion about something you've said, and he replied that he disagreed with you, his body language signals would be congruent with his verbal sentences. That is, they'd match. If, however, he said he agreed with what you said, he would be more likely to be lying because his words and gestures would be incongruent. If you saw a politician standing behind a lectern, speaking confidently with his arms tightly folded on his chest, that is, in a defensive pose, and chin down, that is, a critical or hostile pose, while telling his audience how receptive and open he was to the ideas of young people, would you be convinced? What if he attempted to convince you of his warm, caring approach while giving short, sharp karate chops to the lectern? Observation of gesture clusters and congruence of the verbal and body language channels are the keys to accurately interpreting attitudes through body language.
Rule number 3 is always read gestures in context. All gestures should be considered in the context in which they occur. If, for example, someone was sitting at a bus terminal with his arms and his legs tightly crossed and chin down and it was a cold winter's day, it would most likely mean that he was cold, not defensive. If, however, the person used the same gestures while you were sitting across a table from him trying to sell him an idea, product or service, it could be correctly interpreted as meaning that the person was feeling negative or rejecting your offer. Context is vital and must always be considered when analysing body language. Physical restrictions or disabilities are also a consideration. Your colleague with a dead fish handshake may just have arthritis and be avoiding the pain of a strong grip.
So to kick off, we'll give you a brief introduction to one of the most useful aspects of understanding body language, spotting a liar, and then we'll take you through the whole range of gestures, explaining how to spot them and what to do about the negative ones. It's fairly well known that a mouth-covering gesture is like having a neon sign above your head that says, "I'm lying." Hand-to-face gestures are some of the most informative signals that give away our thoughts and attitudes. The hand-to-mouth movement is an unconscious gesture that may well be inbuilt, but it changes over time. When a 5-year-old child tells a lie, the mouth will be deliberately covered with one or both hands immediately afterwards, a dead giveaway to mum or dad. This gesture continues to be used throughout the individual's lifetime, and all that usually varies is the speed at which it's done. As a teenager, the hand still goes to cover the mouth after the lie is out, but the gesture is not so obvious and tends towards rubbing the fingers around the mouth area rather than the total cover-up. This gesture becomes even more refined in adulthood. When an adult lies, the brain instructs his hand to cover his mouth in an attempt to block the deceitful words. But at the last minute, the hand pulls away and touches something else on the face, the nose. The problem with trying to get away with telling lies is that the subconscious mind acts automatically and independently of the verbal lie, and our body language gives us away. No matter how convincing you may sound, your subconscious mind sends out nervous energy that appears as a non-verbal gesture that directly contradicts your verbal sentence. We're regularly asked, can you fake body language? The general answer is no, because of the lack of congruence that's likely to occur between the main gestures, the body's microsignals and the spoken words. Try telling a lie to an acquaintance, nothing too drastic, and make a conscious effort to suppress all your body gestures while you're in full view of that other person. Did they notice if you made any movements? Now, despite all your best efforts to suppress them, numerous micro-gestures will still have been transmitted. These include facial muscular twitching, expansion and contraction of pupils, sweating at the brow, eye blinking, and many other minute gestures that declare you've just told a fib. These gestures can be detected by trained interviewers or perceptive people watchers. The tip is, if you want to tell a lie, use the telephone. Although it's very difficult to counter the effects of the subconscious, it's possible to refine your non-verbal gestures so that when you tell a lie, you don't get found out. Just look at politicians, lawyers and actors. Many people in these professions have refined their body language to the point where it's difficult to see the lie, and people fall for their lines every day. This is achieved because lying has become second nature to them, and because over the years they've learned to control any gestures that their bodies make, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. The key here is being able to separate the real gestures from the fake ones, so the genuine person can be distinguished from the liar. Signals like pupil dilation, sweating and blushing can't be consciously faked, but exposing the palms to try to appear honest is easily learned. But remember, it's difficult to sustain this fakery for a long period of time. You just need to wait and watch. With all this in mind, Body language and people watching takes on another dimension. Regular observation of what speakers and listeners do with their hands and face will be very valuable to you when you evaluate your everyday contacts. It may take a while for you to achieve high accuracy, but once you do, you'll find that every conversation has an added dimension. Let's now talk about specific body language. Firstly, a new form of palm reading. There are more connections between the brain and the hands than between any other body parts. Few people ever consider how their hands behave or the way they shake hands when they meet someone. Yet those first 5 to 7 handshake pumps establish whether dominance, submission or power plays will take place. The open palm is associated with truth, allegiance and submission. For example, the palm of the hand is the focus when making oaths or giving evidence in a court of law. If you want to discover whether someone's being open and honest or not, watch for palm displays. When people want to be open and honest, they'll often hold one or both palms out to the other person and say something like, "I didn't do it," or "I'm sorry I upset you." Like most body language signals, this is a completely unconscious gesture and one that gives you an intuitive feeling or a hunch that the other person is telling the truth.
Men and women behave differently when trying to conceal things, but if you watch what their hands are doing, all will be revealed. A man who wants to keep quiet about an illicit night out might hide his palms in his pockets, a common sign that a man doesn't want to participate in a conversation, or in an arm-crossed position when he tries to explain to his partner where he was. However, the hidden palms may give her an intuitive feeling that he is not telling the truth. A woman with something to hide will try to avoid the subject or talk about a range of unrelated topics while simultaneously busying her hands with various other activities. So does this mean if you keep your palms visible at all times you are likely to be believed? Well, yes and no. If you tell an outright lie with your palms exposed, you might still appear insincere, because many of the other gestures that should also be visible when displaying honesty are absent. Not only that, the negative gestures used when you lie will appear and will be incongruent with the open palms. Remember the rules of gesture clusters and congruence. You may actually find it difficult to lie convincingly if you're using an open palm gesture, as your gestures and emotions are closely linked.
One of the least noticed but most powerful body signals is given by the human palm when someone is giving directions or commands and in handshaking. When used in a certain way, palm power invests its user with the power of silent authority. There are 3 main palm command gestures: the palm up position, the palm down position, and the palm closed, finger pointed position. Let's say that you ask someone to move something for you. We'll assume that you use the same tone of voice, the same words and facial expressions in each example, and that you change only the position of your palm. The palm facing up is used as a submissive, non-threatening gesture, reminiscent of the pleading gesture of a beggar, and from an evolutionary perspective, it shows that you hold no weapons. The person being asked to move the item will not feel threatened by your request when you use the palm up position. When the palm is turned to face downwards, you now project immediate authority. The other person will sense that you've given them an order to move the item, and they may even begin to feel antagonistic towards you, depending on your relationship with him or the position you have with them in a work environment. For example, if the other person was someone of equal status, he might resist a request with the palm down, but would be more likely to comply if you'd used your palm up. If the person is your subordinate, the palm down position is seen as acceptable because you have the authority to use it. The palm closed finger pointed gesture is a fist where the pointed finger is used. It subconsciously arouses negative feelings in others. This gesture is one of the most annoying anyone can use while speaking, particularly when it beats in time with the speaker's words. In some countries, such as Malaysia and the Philippines, finger pointing at a person is an insult, as this gesture is only used to point at animals. Malaysians will often use their thumb to point at people or to give directions. In an experiment with 8 lecturers, we found that those who mostly used the palm up position received 84% positive testimonials from their participants, and this dropped to 52% when they delivered the same presentation to another audience using mainly the palm down position. The finger-pointed position recorded only 28% positive response, and some participants even walked out during the lecture. If you know that you occasionally finger-point during presentations, try practicing the palm up and palm down positions, and you'll find that you can create a more relaxed atmosphere and have a far more positive effect on others. Alternatively, if you squeeze your index finger against your thumb to make an OK type gesture and talk using this position, you'll come across as authoritative but not aggressive. We taught this gesture to groups of speakers, and we measured the audience reactions. The audiences who listened to the speakers who used this gesture described those speakers as thoughtful, goal-oriented and focused.
Shaking hands is a relic of our ancient past when tribes held out their hands to show that no weapons were being held or concealed. In most Western countries today, it is performed both on greeting and on departure in all business contexts, and increasingly at social events by both men and women. Even in Japan, where bowing has been the norm, handshakes are now widely used. So what should we look for in handshakes? Should you reach first? How many pumps should you give? Is strong better than weak? Let's assume that you have just met someone for the first time and you greet each other with a handshake. One of three basic attitudes is subconsciously transmitted by that handshake. 1. Dominance. Your reaction to this handshake is, he's trying to dominate me. I better be cautious. You transmit dominance by turning your hand so that your palm faces down in the handshake. Your palm doesn't have to face directly down, but it's the upper hand and communicates that you want to take control of the encounter. You literally have the upper hand. 2. Submission. If you're on the receiving end of a submissive handshake, you think, I can dominate this person. He'll do what I want. Submission is when you shake your hand with your palm facing upwards, symbolically giving the other person the upper hand. This can be effective if you want to give the other person control or allow him to feel that he is in charge of the situation. For example, if you were trying to make an apology. 3. Equality. You think, I feel comfortable with this person. When two dominant people shake hands, a symbolic power struggle takes place as each attempts to turn the other's palm into the submissive position. The result is a firm handshake with both palms remaining in the vertical position, and this creates a feeling of equality and mutual respect because neither is prepared to give in to the other. Remember that the handshake evolved as a gesture to say hello or goodbye or to seal an agreement, so it always needs to be warm, friendly and positive. There are two key ingredients for creating rapport in a handshake. First, make sure that yours and the other person's palms are both in a vertical position so that no one is dominant or submissive. Second, apply the same pressure you receive. Also keep in mind that the average male hand can exert around twice the power of an average female hand, so make allowances. Power and control issues are less important to women, which probably accounts for why few women use the upper hand ritual. Research has revealed that some women will give men a soft handshake in some social situations to imply submissiveness in order to highlight their femininity. In a business context, however, this approach can be disastrous for a woman. Women who display high femininity in business meetings are not taken seriously by other business women or men, despite the fact that it's now fashionable or politically correct to say everyone is the same.
If you're on the receiving end of an aggressive palm-down handshake, there are ways that you can counter it. Don't try to turn the other person's palm back up. It's obvious what you're doing. Instead, step forward on your left foot as you reach to shake hands. This takes a little practice because stepping forward on the right foot is the natural position for 90% of people when shaking with the right hand. Next, step forward with your right leg, moving across in front of the person and into his personal space. Finally, bring your left leg across to your right leg to complete the manoeuvre, and then shake the person's hand. This tactic allows you to straighten the handshake or even turn it over into a submissive position. It almost feels as if you're walking across in front of him and is the equivalent of winning an arm wrestling bout. It also allows you to take control by invading his personal space. It's a nifty technique when dealing with overbearing, dominant types. Another solution to the dominant handshake is to respond with your hand in the palm-up position and then put your left hand over his right to form a double-hander and to straighten the handshake in a kind of hand sandwich. This switches the power from him to you and is a much simpler way of dealing with the situation, and it's much easier for women to use. Another unpopular handshake is the clammy handshake. Nervousness causes the blood to drain away from the outer layer of the skin on the hands. The result is that our hands lose temperature and begin to sweat, making them feel cold and clammy, resulting in a handshake that feels like a wet salmon. Keep a handkerchief in your pocket or handbag so that you can dry your palms immediately before meeting someone so that you don't make a poor first impression. The battle of the handshakes can often be seen on television news bulletins when two leaders stand beside each other for photographs. The one who stands to the left of the picture is perceived by the viewers to have a dominant edge over the other, as he can operate the powerful upper hand handshake. The double-hander is sometimes called the politician's handshake. The initiator of the double-hander tries to give the impression he's trustworthy and honest, but when it's used on a person he's just met, it can have the reverse effect, leaving the receiver feeling suspicious about the initiator's intentions. Other examples of controlling handshakes on our handshake hit list are, in order of control, the elbow grasp. This is where the shaker uses his left hand to grasp the elbow of the shakee. There's the wrist hold, where the shaker grabs the shakee's wrist. The shoulder hold, that's where they grab the shakee's shoulder. And finally, the upper arm grip, where the shaker leans forward and grasps the upper arm of his unfortunate victim. With these handshakes, the initiator is attempting to show an intimate connection with the receiver while, at the same time, attempting to control their movement. All these handshakes invade your personal space to some degree. So, if you don't have some sort of personal bond with the other person, don't use any double-hander. And if the person who gives you one doesn't have a personal connection with you, look for their hidden agenda.
To summarise, the most important thing to remember is always to give notice to the others that you intend to shake hands so as not to catch them off guard. Hold your hand out as early as possible to give clear notice of your intention to shake hands, and this will avoid any fumbling. Keep your hands vertical and don't invade anyone's personal space. Also, you must be aware of the context of the shake, particularly with a soft or limp handshake. Maybe they have arthritis or work with their hands such as an artist, surgeon or musician and prefer a soft handshake to a firm grip.
Like a handshake, facial expressions can convey as much as spoken words, particularly the smile. Nothing can light up a face like a natural smile. Often an unconscious response. A real smile involves movement of the zygomatics major muscles, which run down the side of the face to the corner of the mouth, and the orbicularis oculi, which pull the eyes back. The zygomatics are consciously controlled. In other words, they're used to produce false smiles of fake enjoyment to try to appear friendly or subordinate. The orbicularis oculi muscles at the eyes act independently and reveal the true feelings of a genuine smile. So if you want to tell the difference, look at the eyes. False smiles pull back only the mouth. Real smiles pull back both the mouth and the eyes. Smiling tells another person that you are non-threatening and asks them to accept you on a personal level. Lack of smiling explains why many dominant individuals such as Vladimir Putin, Clint Eastwood, Margaret Thatcher and Charles Bronson, they always look grumpy or aggressive and they're rarely seen smiling. They simply don't want to appear in any way submissive. The remarkable thing about a smile is that when you give it to someone, it causes them to reciprocate by returning the smile, even when you're both using fake smiles. This is why regular smiling is important to have as part of your body language repertoire, even when you don't feel like it, because smiling directly influences other people's attitudes and how they respond to you. Interestingly, as smiling is such a disarming gesture, most people wrongly assume that it's a favourite of liars. But research shows that when people deliberately lie, most, especially men, smile less than they usually do. However, it's important to note that a liar's smile appears more quickly than a genuine smile. It's held much longer, almost as if the liar is wearing a mask. A false smile often appears stronger on one side of the face than the other, as both sides of the brain attempt to make it appear genuine.
Let's have a look at some of the most common types of smiles. The tight-lipped smile is when the lips are stretched tight across the face to form a straight line and the teeth are concealed. It sends a message that the smiler has a secret or a withheld opinion or attitude that they will not be sharing with you. It's a favourite of women who don't want to reveal that they don't like someone and is clearly read by other women as a rejection signal. Most men are oblivious to it. The twisted smile shows opposite emotions on each side of the face. The twisted smile is peculiar to the Western world and can only be done deliberately, which means it can only send one message: sarcasm. The drop jaw smile is a practice smile where the lower jaw is simply dropped down to give the impression that the person is laughing or playful. This is a favourite of people such as the Joker in Batman, Bill Clinton and Hugh Grant, all of whom use it to engender happy reactions in their audiences or to win more votes. The sideways looking up smile was a favourite of Princess Diana. With the head turned down and away while looking up with a tight-lipped smile, the smiler looks juvenile, playful and secretive. This coy smile has been shown to be men's favourite everywhere because when a woman does it, it engenders parental male feelings, making men want to protect and care for females. Not surprisingly, this smile is a regular in women's courtship repertoire, and it's read by men as seductive and is a powerful come-on signal. They say that laughter really is the best medicine. Like smiles, laughter affects the body in so many positive ways due to the release of endorphins, which have a similar chemical composition to morphine or heroin and have a tranquilizing effect on the body while building the immune system. This explains why happy people rarely get sick and miserable, complaining people often seem to be ill. If you are surrounded by miserable, unhappy people, you are also likely to mirror their expressions and become morose or depressed.
The opposite to pulling up the corners of the mouth to show happiness is pulling both corners downwards to show a down-mouth expression. This is an expression worn by a person who feels unhappy, despondent, depressed, angry or tense. Unfortunately, if a person holds these negative emotions throughout their lifetime, the corners of the mouth may set into a permanent down position. Studies show that we stand further away from people who have this expression, we give them less eye contact and avoid them when they're walking towards us. If you discover that the down mouth has crept into your repertoire, practice smiling regularly, which will not only help you avoid looking like an angry bulldog in later life, but will help you feel more positive. It will also help you to avoid frightening little children and being thought as a grumpy old cow.
It's a fact that in courtship, women do most of the laughing and smiling. Laughing in these contexts is used as a way of determining how successfully a couple is likely to bond in a relationship. Put simply, the more he can make her laugh, the more attractive she will find him. This is because the ability to make others laugh is perceived as a dominant trait, and women prefer dominant males, while males prefer subordinate females. A subordinate person will laugh to appease a superior person, and the superior person will make subordinates laugh, but without laughing himself, as a way of maintaining his superiority. This explains why having a sense of humour is near the top of a woman's priority list of what they look for in a man. When a woman says, "He's such a funny guy, we spent the whole night laughing together," she usually means that she spent the night laughing and he spent the night making her laugh. From a man's perspective, saying that a woman has a good sense of humour doesn't mean she tells jokes, it means she laughs at his jokes. Fortunately, you can learn to be humorous.
In summary, a genuine smile is always good news because when you smile at another person, they'll almost always return the smile, which causes positive feelings in both you and them because of cause and effect. Studies prove that most encounters will run more smoothly, last longer, have more positive outcomes and dramatically improve relationships when you make a point of regularly smiling and laughing to the point where it becomes a habit. Evidence shows conclusively that smiles and laughter build the immune system, defend the body against illness and disease, medicate the body, sell ideas, teach better, attract more friends, and extend life. Learning to read arm signals is another important consideration when translating someone's body language. Hiding behind a barrier is a response we learn at an early age to protect ourselves. As children, we hid behind furniture in our mother's skirt whenever we found ourselves in a threatening situation. As we grew older, this hiding behaviour became more sophisticated, and by the age of 6, we learned to fold our arms tightly across our chests whenever a threatening situation arose. During our teens, we learned to make the crossed arms gesture less obvious by relaxing our arms a little and combining the gesture with crossed legs. As we grow older, the arm crossing gesture can evolve to the point where we try to make it even less obvious to others. By folding one or both arms across the chest, a barrier is formed that is an unconscious attempt to block out what we perceive as a threat or undesirable circumstances. The arms fold neatly across the heart and lungs region to protect these vital organs from being injured, so it's likely that arm crossing is inborn. One thing's certain, when a person has a nervous, negative or defensive attitude, it's very likely that he will fold his arms firmly on his chest, showing that he feels threatened. This is an obvious sign to look out for. Tests have revealed that when a listener folds his arms, not only does he have more negative attitudes about the speaker, he's also paying less attention to what's being said. It's for this reason that training centres should have chairs with arms on them to allow the attendees to leave their arms uncrossed. Some people argue that they habitually cross their arms because they're comfortable. But let's be realistic. Any gesture will feel comfortable when you have the corresponding attitude. That is, if you have a negative, defensive or nervous attitude, folded arms will feel comfortable. If you're having fun with your friends, folded arms will feel uncomfortable. Remember that with all body language, the meaning of the message is also in the receiver as well as the sender. You may feel comfortable with your arms crossed and your back and neck stiffened, but studies have shown that others' reactions to these gestures are negative. So the lesson here is clear. Avoid crossing your arms under any circumstances unless your intention is to show others that you don't agree or that you don't want to participate. There are also gender issues to consider here. Men's arms rotate slightly inwards while women's arms rotate slightly outwards. These rotation differences have enabled men to aim and throw more accurately, while women's splayed elbows give them a wider, more stable position for carrying babies. One interesting difference is that women tend to keep their arms more open when they're around men they find attractive, and are more likely to fold their arms across their breasts around aggressive or unattractive men.
There are many arm-folding positions, and we'll discuss here the most common ones you're likely to see. Crossed arms on the chest is universal and is decoded with the same defensive or negative meaning almost everywhere. It is commonly seen amongst strangers in public meetings, in queues or cafe lines, in elevators, or anywhere that people feel uncertain or insecure. When you see someone taking the arms crossed position, it's reasonable to assume that you may have said something with which they disagree. It may be pointless continuing your line of argument even though a person could be verbally agreeing with you. The fact is that body language is more honest than words. Your objective should be to try and work out why they cross their arms and try to move the person into a more receptive position. The attitude causes the gesture to occur, and maintaining the gesture forces the attitude to remain. A simple but effective way of breaking the arms folded position is to give the listener something to hold or give them something to do. Giving them a pen, book, brochure or written test forces them to unfold their arms and lean forward. This moves them into a more open position and therefore a more open attitude. Asking someone to lean forward to look at a visual presentation can also be an effective means of opening the arms folded position. You could also lean forward with your palms up and say, "I can see you have a question. What would you like to know?" Or, "What's your opinion?" You then sit or lean back to indicate that it's their turn to speak. By using your palms, you non-verbally tell them that you would like them to be open and honest because that's what you're being.
A cluster to watch out for is if a person has clenched fists as well as a full arm cross. This cluster, called fist clenched, arms crossed, shows hostility as well as defensiveness. If it's combined with a tight-lipped smile or clenched teeth and red face, a verbal or even physical attack could happen. A conciliatory approach is needed to discover what's causing it if the reason is not already apparent. This person has an aggressive, attacking attitude, so be careful how you proceed. Another variation of the crossed arms position is the double arm grip, which is characterised by the person's hands tightly gripping their upper arms to reinforce themselves and avoid exposure to the front of the body. It's a person's way of comforting himself with a form of self-hugging. Arm gripping is commonly seen in dentists and doctors' waiting rooms, or with first-time air travellers who are waiting for lift-off. It shows a negative, restrained attitude.
A person's status can influence arm-folding gestures. A superior type can make his superiority felt by not folding his arms, saying in effect, "I'm not afraid, so I'll keep my body open and exposed." Let's say, for example, that at a company's social function, the MD is introduced to several new employees. Having greeted them with a palms-down handshake, he stands back from them, a metre away, with his hands by his side or behind his back in the palm-and-palm position, like Prince Philip showing superiority, or with one or both hands in his pocket, showing non-involvement. He rarely folds his arms across his chest so as not to show the slightest hint of nervousness. Conversely, after shaking hands with the boss, the new employees may take a full or partial arm-crossing position because of their apprehension about being in the presence of the company's top person. Both the MD and the new employees feel comfortable with their own gesture clusters, as each is signalling his status relative to the other. But what happens when the MD meets a young, up-and-coming male who is also a superior type and who may even signal that he is just as important as the general manager? The likely outcome is that after the two give each other a dominant handshake, the younger executive may take an arm-fold gesture with both thumbs pointing upwards. This gesture has the arms crossed plus both thumbs up, showing that he's feeling cool and in control. As he talks, he gestures with his thumbs to emphasize points he's making. The thumbs-up gesture is a way of showing others we have a self-confident attitude, and the folded arms still gives a feeling of protection. If you see this cluster together with other positive signals, you can reasonably assume that your listener is in a receptive mood. A fist-clenched arm-cross position would mean the opposite. Someone who is feeling defensive but also submissive at the same time will sit in a symmetrical position, which means one side of their body is a perfect mirror of the other. They display tense muscle tone and look as if they expect to be attacked, whereas a person who is feeling defensive and dominant will take an asymmetrical pose, that is, one side of the body doesn't mirror the other.
A partial arm cross is another gesture to be aware of. As adults, we often attempt to recreate the comforting feelings of a parental hug whenever we find ourselves in a stressful situation. Rather than take a full arm cross gesture, which announces that we're fearful, women often substitute a subtler version, a partial arm cross, where one arm swings across the body to hold or touch the other arm to form a barrier, and it looks as if she's hugging herself. Partial arm barriers are often seen in meetings where a person may be a stranger to the group or is lacking in self-confidence. Any woman taking this position in a tense situation will usually claim that she's just being comfortable. The male equivalent of this is holding hands with yourself. It's a gesture commonly used by men who are standing in front of a crowd to receive an award or to give a speech. Also known as the broken zipper position, it makes a man feel secure because he can protect his crown jewels. It's the same position men take in a line at a soup kitchen, and it reveals their dejected, vulnerable feelings. It recreates the feeling of having someone else hold your hand.
Famous people get just as nervous as you and I, but are more practiced at hiding their anxiety. They want to project a cool, controlled attitude when on display, but their anxiety or apprehension leaks out in disguised forms of arm crossing. As in all arm cross gestures, one arm swings across in front of the body towards the other arm, but instead of the arms crossing, one hand touches or holds onto a handbag, bracelet, watch, shirt cuff, or object on or near their other arm. Once again, the barrier is formed and the secure feeling is achieved. The cufflink adjust for example, is the trademark of Prince Charles, while female members of the royal family carry a handbag which can be used as a defensive barrier and also as a method of signalling to minders that they want to stop or go or be rescued from someone who is boring them.
Another gesture you can look for is the coffee cup barrier. Offering a refreshment during a meeting or negotiation is also an excellent strategy for gauging how the other person is receiving your offer. Where a person places their cup immediately after they take a drink is a strong indicator of whether or not they're convinced or open to what you are saying. Someone who is feeling hesitant, unsure or negative about what they're hearing will place their cup to the opposite side of their body to form a single arm barrier. When they're accepting of what they're hearing, they place the cup to the side of their body, showing an open and accepting attitude. An underrated gesture is the arm touch. Skillful elbow touching can actually give you up to 3 times the chance of getting what you want. There are 3 reasons why this technique works. First, the elbow is considered a public space and is far enough away from intimate parts of the body. Second, touching a stranger is not considered acceptable in most countries, so it creates an impression. And third, a light 3-second elbow touch creates a momentary bond between 2 people. Overall, we found that women were 4 times more likely to touch another woman than a man was to touch another man. In many places, touching a stranger above or below the elbow did not produce the same positive results as with directly touching the elbow, and it often received negative reactions. Touching for more than 3 seconds also received a negative reaction, with the person suddenly looking down at your hand to see what you were doing. Elbow and hand touching, when done discreetly, grabs attention, reinforces a comment, underlines a concept, increases your influence over others, makes you more memorable and creates positive impressions on everyone. So, when you're next meeting someone new and you shake hands, extend your left arm, give a light touch on their elbow or hand as you shake, repeat their name to confirm you heard it correctly, and watch their reaction. Not only does it make that person feel important, it lets you remember their name through repetition. Also, make a decision now to practice not crossing your arms, and take note of what follows, because we will show you what to do to project a more positive, confident image.
At this point, having discussed what to look out for, we should talk a little about the cultural differences we encounter and how they can affect body language around the world. Even the most minor cultural differences have huge impact on body language. Just the mere fact of driving on different sides of the road can cause confusion, because all cultures walk on the same side of the pavement as they drive on the road. This means if you're British, Australian, South African or a New Zealander, you drive and walk to the left. The consequence is that you'd find the Europeans constantly bumping into you as you walk on the pavement, because as they approach, you step to your left, they step to their right, and you collide. Wearing sunglasses in foreign countries is the single biggest cause of pavement collisions between cultures, because no one can see the other person's gaze to know which way they intend to step. But it's a novel way of meeting new and interesting foreigners. So how aware are you of cultural differences in body language? Try this exercise. Hold up your main hand to display the number 5. Do it now. Now change to the number 2. If you're Anglo-Saxon, there's a 96% chance you'll be holding up your middle and index fingers. If you're European, there's a 94% chance you'll be holding up your thumb and index finger. Europeans start counting with the number 1 on their thumb, 2 on the index finger, 3 on the middle finger, and so on. Anglo-Saxons count number 1 on the index finger, 2 on the middle finger, and finish with number 5 on the thumb. We'll discuss the different cultural meanings to hand signals a little later on.
As we said before, facial expressions and smiles register the same meanings to people almost everywhere. Paul Ekman of the University of California showed photographs of the emotions of happiness, anger, fear, sadness, disgust and surprise to people in 21 different cultures, and found that in every case the majority in each country agreed about the pictures that showed happiness, sadness, disgust, fear and anger. The only significant cultural difference was with the Japanese, who described the fear photograph as surprise. Ekman also went to New Guinea to study the South Four culture and the Dani people of West Irian, who had been isolated from the rest of the world. He recorded the same results, the exception being that, like the Japanese, these cultures could not distinguish fear from surprise. He filmed these Stone Age people enacting these same expressions, then showed them to Americans who correctly identified them all, proving that the meanings of smiling and facial expressions are universal. Research has shown that expressions are inborn in humans. Dr. Linda Camaras from DePaul University in Chicago measured Japanese and American babies' facial responses using the facial action coding system. This system allowed researchers to record, separate and catalogue infant facial expressions, and they found that both Japanese and American infants displayed exactly the same emotional expressions.
So far we have concentrated on body language that is common to most parts of the world. The biggest cultural differences exist mainly in relation to territorial space, eye contact, touch frequency and insult gestures. The regions that have the greatest number of different local signals are Arab countries, parts of Asia and Japan. Greeting people is the first body language encounter, so it is important to understand how cultural differences impact upon your greeting so as not to make mistakes. Handshaking differences can make for some embarrassing and humorous cultural encounters. British, German, Australian, New Zealand and American colleagues will usually shake hands on meeting and again on departure. Most European cultures will shake hands with each other several times a day, and some French have been noted to shake hands for up to 30 minutes a day. Indian, Asian and Arabic cultures may continue to hold your hand when the handshake has ended. Germans and French give 1 or 2 firm pumps followed by a short hold, whereas Brits give 3 to 5 pumps compared with an American's 5 to 7 pumps. This is hilarious to observe at international conferences where a range of different handshake pumping takes place between surprise delegates. To the Americans, the Germans with their single pump seem distant. To the Germans, however, the Americans pump hands as if they're blowing up an airbed.
When it comes to greeting with a cheek kiss, the Scandinavians are happy with a single kiss. The French mostly prefer a double, while the Dutch, Belgians and Arabs go for the triple kiss. The Australians, New Zealanders and Americans are continually confused about greeting kisses and bump noses as they fumble their way through a single peck. The Brits either avoid kissing by standing back or will surprise you with a European double kiss. When in conversation with people from different cultures, you may be aware that their body language differs from yours. For example, when Italians talk, they keep their hands held high as a way of holding the floor in a conversation. What at first seems like affectionate arm touching during an Italian conversation is nothing more than a way of stopping the listener from raising his hands and taking the floor. As a comparison, the Germans and British look as though they're physically paralysed when they talk. They are daunted when trying to converse with the Italians and the French and rarely get an opportunity to speak. The French use their forearms and hands when they talk, the Italians use their entire arms and body, while the Brits and Germans stand at attention. When it comes to doing international business, smart attire, excellent references and a good proposal can all become instantly unstuck by the smallest, most innocent gesture which can sink the whole deal. Our research in 42 countries shows that North Americans are the least culturally sensitive people, with the British coming in a close second. Considering that 86% of North Americans don't have a passport, it follows that they would be the most ignorant of international body language customs. Even George W. Bush had to apply for a passport after becoming president so that he could travel overseas. The Brits, however, do travel extensively, but prefer everyone else to use British body signals, to speak English and to serve fish and chips. Most foreign cultures do not expect you to learn their language, but are extremely impressed by any traveller who has taken the time to learn and use local body language customs. This tells them that you respect their culture.
One area where handshakes, kissing and bear hugs have not become established is Japan, where such bodily contact is considered impolite. Japanese people bow on the first meeting, the person with the highest status bowing the least and the one with the least status bowing the most. On first meeting, business cards are exchanged, each person assesses the other's status and appropriate bowing follows. A top tip for when you go to Japan is to make sure your shoes are spotlessly clean and in good condition, as every time a Japanese bows, he inspects them. The Japanese way of listening to someone involves a repertoire of smiles, nods and polite noises which have no direct equivalent in any other language. The idea is to encourage you to keep on talking, but this is often misinterpreted by Westerners and Europeans as agreement. The head nod is an almost universal sign for yes, except for the Bulgarians who use the gesture to signify no, and the Japanese who use it for politeness. If you say something a Japanese doesn't agree with, he'll still say yes or hai in Japanese to keep you talking. A Japanese yes usually means yes, I heard you, and not yes, I agree. For example, if you say to a Japanese person, you don't agree, do you? He will nod his head and say yes, even though he may not agree. In the Japanese context, it means yes, you are correct, I don't agree. The Japanese are concerned with saving face and have developed a set of rules to prevent things going wrong, so try to avoid saying no or asking questions where the answer might be no. The closest a Japanese will get to saying the word no is, "It is very difficult," or "We will give this positive study," when they really mean let's forget the whole thing and go home.
A cultural difference which can really get a strong reaction is nose blowing. Europeans and Westerners blow their noses into a handkerchief or tissue, while Asians and Japanese spit or snort. Each is appalled by what they see as the other's disgusting behaviour. This dramatic cultural difference is the direct result of the spread of tuberculosis in past centuries. In Europe, tuberculosis was the AIDS of past centuries, so governments instructed people to blow their nose to avoid further spreading the disease. This is why Westerners react so strongly to spitting. A spitting person could spread tuberculosis around, so people were as alarmed by that prospect as they would be if you could spread AIDS by spitting. If tuberculosis had been a problem in Eastern countries, the cultural reaction would be the same as with Westerners. As a result, the Japanese are appalled when someone produces a handkerchief or tissue and blows their nose into it and puts it back into their pocket or their purse or up their sleeve. Japanese are unimpressed at the English custom of men wearing a handkerchief in their jacket top pocket. This is the equivalent of proudly dangling a roll of toilet paper from your pocket, ready for action. Asians believe, correctly, that it is a healthier option to spit, but it's a habit that's repulsive to Westerners and Europeans. This is why business meetings between Westerners and Europeans can fail when they've all got a cold. So don't feel upset by an Asian who spits or snorts, and never blow your nose in front of a Japanese person.
As we discussed before, a gesture used in London or New York may mean something completely different in Athens or Tokyo. Let's look at 3 common hand gestures used all over the world: the ring gesture, the thumbs up, and the V sign. The ring, or OK gesture, where the palm faces out, the thumb and the forefinger meet at their tips, and the 3 remaining fingers are splayed out, was popularized in the USA in the early 19th century. Although what OK stands for has been lost in the midst of time, the gesture and its meaning is common to all English-speaking countries. However, in France it means 0 or nothing. In Japan it means money. In some Mediterranean countries, its use infers that a man is homosexual, so if in Greece or Brazil, don't use this gesture unless you want to upset the locals. In Britain, the US, Australia and New Zealand, the thumbs up gesture means everything's okay or great. It is also used by hitchhikers, hence the expression thumbing a lift. If you were brought up on the continent of Europe, however, the thumbs up signal means 1, as continentals start counting using their thumb first rather than their index finger. In Greece, its use is different again, and here its meaning is abusive. Thrusting the thumb sharply forward means get stuffed, or a similar phrase that involves sex and travel. So don't hitchhike in Greece, or you could get yourself into trouble.
While Winston Churchill's palm-facing out V sign meant victory, The palm facing in V sign has an impolite get stuffed meaning in Australia, New Zealand and Britain. However, on the continent, the palm in V sign still means victory in many places. So if you're going to try to insult one of our European friends by giving him a get stuffed V sign, he may walk away wondering what victory you're referring to. It also means the number 2 in the USA, so giving a barman a V sign there may result in getting a couple of beers.
Whether or not someone will be offended by being touched during conversation depends on his or her culture. For example, the French and the Italians continually touch as they talk, while the British prefer not to touch at any time unless it's on a sports field in front of a large audience. Intimate embracing by British, Australian and New Zealand sportsmen is copied from South American and continental sportsmen who embrace and kiss each other after a goal is scored and continue this intimate behaviour in the dressing rooms. The moment the Aussies, Brits and Kiwis leave the field, it reverts to the hands-off or else policy. Dr. Ken Cooper studied touch frequencies in a number of countries and recorded the following results for touches per hour. Puerto Rico 180, Paris 110, Florida 2, London 0. It is very easy to inadvertently offend someone from another culture. But remember, people do business with people who make them feel comfortable, and successfully negotiating a deal can come down to sincerity and good manners in the end. So when entering a foreign country, concentrate on reducing the broadness of your body language until you had the opportunity to observe the locals. If you're not sure about how to be polite in someone else's culture, ask the locals to show you how things are done. Cultural misinterpretation of gestures can produce embarrassing results, and a person's background should always be considered before jumping to conclusions about the meaning of his or her body language and gestures.
Let's now have a look at the most common hand and thumb gestures that people use. Scientists have noted that there are more nerve connections between the hands and the brain than there are between any other parts of the body. So the gestures and positions we take with our hands give powerful insights into our emotional state. Because our hands are usually held in front of our body, these signals are easy to see, and most of us have several trademark hand positions that we continually use. In many countries, the hands have taken on the role of punctuation marks to regulate turn-taking in conversation. The hands raised gesture has been borrowed from the Italians and French, who are the biggest users of hand-talking, but it's still rarely seen in England, where waving your hands about as you speak is seen as inappropriate or poor style. In Italy, as we've said before, the order of talking is simple. The person with his hands raised has the floor and does the talking. The listener will have his hands down or behind his back. So the trick is to get your hands in the air if you want to get a word in, and this can be done by either looking away and then raising your hands, or by touching the other person's arms to suppress their hand as you raise yours. Many people assume when Italians talk they're being friendly or intimate because they continually touch each other, but in fact each is attempting to restrict the other's hands to take the floor. Watching how a person summarises a discussion, giving both points of view, can reveal whether they have a bias one way or the other. They usually hold one hand, palm up, and articulate each point on the fingers, and then give the opposing points on the other hand. Right-handed people reserve their favoured point of view for their right hand, and left-handers favour their left hand. Using hand gestures grabs attention, increases the impact of communication, and helps individuals retain more of the information they're hearing. At the University of Manchester, Geoffrey Beattie and Nina McLaughlin conducted a study where volunteers listened to stories featuring cartoon characters such as Roger Rabbit, Tweety Pie and Sylvester the Cat. For some listeners, a narrator added hand gestures, such as moving the hands quickly up and down to show running, waving the hands about to demonstrate a hairdryer, and holding the arms wide apart to show a fat opera singer. When the listeners were tested 10 minutes later, those who had seen the hand gestures had up to a third higher response when recalling the details of the stories, demonstrating dramatically the effect of hand gestures on our ability to recall information.
Let's now examine some of the most common hand gestures you're likely to see every day, and then we'll show you what to do about them. Rubbing the palms together is a common gesture. This is a way in which people communicate positive expectation. The dice thrower rubs the dice between his palms as a sign of a positive expectancy of winning. The master of ceremony rubs his palms together to say to his audience, "We've been looking forward to hearing our next speaker." And the excited salesperson struts into the sales manager's office, rubs his palm together and says excitedly, "We've just received a big order." However, the waiter who comes to your table at the end of the evening rubbing his palms together and asking, "Anything else, sir?" is non-verbally telling you that he expects a good tip. The speed at which a person rubs their palms together signals who he thinks will receive the positive benefits. Say, for example, you want to buy a home and you visit an estate agent. After describing the property you want, the agent rubs his palms together quickly and says, "I've got just the right house for you." In this way, the agent has signaled that he expects the results to be to your benefit. But how would you feel if he rubbed his palms together very slowly as he told you that he had the ideal property? He'd seem sneaky or devious, and you get the feeling that he expected the results to benefit him, not you. So watch for the speed. That's where the real information is. The thumb and finger rub is also easy to understand. Rubbing the thumb against the index finger or fingertips is commonly used as a money expectancy gesture. Its symbolism is that of rubbing a coin between the thumb and the fingertips. It is often used by the street vendor who says, "I can save you up to 50%, or by the person who says to his friend, "Can you lend me £50? This gesture should be avoided at all times by any professional person who deals with clients because it carries negative associations with money.
Hand signal number 3 is the hands clenched together gesture. This is where the fingers are laced together in front of the body. This gesture has 3 main positions: hands clenched in front of the face, hands clenched resting on a desk or on the lap, and when standing, hands clenched in front of the crotch. At first, this gesture can seem to signal confidence, as some people who use it often smile. On one occasion, we observed a negotiator describing the deal he'd just lost. As he went further and further into his story, he'd not only taken the hands clenched position, his knuckles were beginning to turn white and looked as though they were welding together. The hands clenched gesture shows a restrained, anxious, or negative attitude. It's also a favourite of Queen Elizabeth when she's on royal visits and public appearances, and is usually positioned on her lap. Research into the hands clenched position by negotiation experts has shown that it's also a frustration gesture when used in a negotiation, signalling that the person was holding back a negative or anxious attitude. It was a position assumed by a person who felt that they were either not convincing the other person or that they thought they were losing the negotiation. As with all negative gestures, you need to take action to unlock the person's fingers. You can do this by offering them a drink or asking them to hold something, or the negative attitude will remain in the same way it does with any arm-crossing position. The next gesture is the steeple, where the fingertips of one hand lightly press against those of the other hand to form a church steeple, and will sometimes rock back and forth, almost like a spider doing push-ups on a mirror. So far, we've emphasised that gestures come in clusters, like words in a sentence, and that they must be interpreted in the context in which you observe them. Steepling can be an exception to these rules, as it often occurs in isolation of other gestures. We found that the steeple was frequently used in superior-subordinate interaction, and that it indicates a self-assured or confident attitude. Superiors often use this gesture position when they give instructions or advice to subordinates, and it's particularly common amongst accountants, lawyers and managers. As a general rule, the steeple should be avoided when you want to be persuasive or to win the other person's confidence, as it can sometimes be seen or read as smugness and arrogance. Again, it's important to read other signals that precede the steeple to get the true meaning. If the steeple gesture follows a series of other positive gestures, and it appears when you show the other person the solution to his problem, then it's likely you've been given the go-ahead to ask for the order. On the other hand, if the steeple gesture follows a series of negative gestures such as arm folding, leg crossing, looking away and any hand-to-face gestures, he may be confident that he won't say yes or that he can get rid of you. In both cases, the steeple gesture registers confidence, but one has positive results and the other negative. The gestures preceding the steeple are the key to the likely outcome.
The next is the face platter. This is not a negative gesture, it's a positive one used in courtship. It's used mainly by women or by gay men who want to attract a man's attention. A woman will place one hand on top of the other beneath her chin and present her face to a man as if it's on a platter for him to admire. If you are going to use flattery, sincere or not, this gesture gives you the green light to go for it. Holding hands behind the back is a gesture commonly used by leaders and royalty, as well as by policemen patrolling the beat, the headmaster walking around the school playground, senior military personnel, and anyone in a position of authority. The person exposes their stomach, heart, crotch, and throat in a subconscious act of fearlessness. Our experience shows that if you take this position when you are in a high-stress